So thank you very much, and I mean, big thanks for the invitation to be here with this what might sound like very boring if you have a technical taste, but something that I wanted to bring to you because it's we expect it will change the way in which we develop open source technologies in Europe. It will also change the way in which we consume technologies in Europe. And hopefully it will change your lives, your professional lives, I mean, sooner than later in some way or another, hopefully for the better. So have you ever heard about this important project of common European interest on next generation cloud infrastructure and services? IPCEI, cloud. Okay, it's the most expensive, best kept secret in Europe. We've managed to, for the first time, to mobilize 1 year ago to get the green light from the European Commission for member states, including Italy, to invest a total of 1,200 million euros from the next generation EU funding and some other budgets to produce open source technologies for the cloud and the edge. Apart from that, the European industry has come forward with another 1,400 million euros. So it's a co-investment mechanism by which these companies from more than 120 companies from 12 member states, we come together to develop the technologies that we need to manage what you've probably heard already, this famous cloud edge computing continuum, right? So what's the problem? How many of you think there is a tiny problem in the way we consume cloud services or the cloud market in terms of the share of or the presence of European companies in there? Someone share? I mean, feel it's sometimes just a feeling like. Okay, so what the reality is a bit. It's a bit of a poor show. I mean, we know that the cloud market is growing a lot. You know that better than many other people. The reality is that the share of the European companies, the cloud providers, is decreasing. So there's a lot of money. European companies and governments are investing a lot of money in cloud. They're migrating to the cloud, but they're migrating to the hyperscalers. In terms of producing the software that we need to manage data centers or digital infrastructures, European companies are mostly absent from the top companies. And also in the open source world, I know open source is kind of, we always say it's global, blah, 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 everyone can use it. But then if you look at open source, like any other technology from the sovereignty perspective and the geostrategic perspective, you start realizing that sometimes we've developed a number of dependencies with the same companies and same big tech and corporations. These same software solutions were intended to fight against. So now we over the last 15 years or so, things have changed. You know, all these events, they tend to be community, sometimes have a slightly more commercial dimension, which is, it's fine. But in that same process, we've allowed the same big tech companies and corporations that 15 years ago, they were mocking Linux and open source. They now play a key role, a crucial role in the infrastructure of how we develop open source in Europe and globally. OpenStack is just an example, also a competitor of OpenNebula. Just I want to come clean. So the European Union came up with a potential solution for this. I also want to be honest, we have failed many times before in producing alternatives in Europe for big tech and in this case, hyperscalers. But this is the first time that this new mechanism, the IPCEI, is being applied. And the IPCEI is a mechanism by which, as I mentioned before, we are creating this ecosystem of European companies working together, collaborating together to produce the technologies that they need. Sometimes they will end up competing against each other in terms of services and commercial products, but the core technologies we expect they will collaborate and develop this. This sounds very familiar to all of you, right? Things like Kubernetes. I mean, but in Europe, we're not so used to that. We're not so used to develop things together and transform it into products. We're more used to isolation, and everyone develops their own stuff and forget about the others. So transforming people, moving from being consumers of technology developed somewhere else to being the active developers and maintainers. And you've probably heard about this large investment Europe is doing in batteries or microelectronics or hydrogen. So we are like the small sister in that family of large strategic projects that Europe is investing a lot of state aid. In practical terms, we started last year on some existing technologies, but also developing new ones. We are right now the largest open source project in the history of the European Union. We are mobilizing this more than 140 companies for a challenge that sounds very simple, which is how can we move workloads and how can we ensure portability and interoperability across the many different cloud providers that exist nowadays with your own on-prem infrastructure? And then if we expect to be in an environment with tens of thousands of edge nodes and hundreds of new providers in the near future, how we manage all this heterogeneous environment? I mean, it's very easy when you go to a hyperscaler and a few data centers, because everything, as you know, is very homogeneous. You have your environment, your interface. But when you have hundreds of different actors in the market, that becomes a bit of a mess, right? So we're building the technology to do that. It's for companies to be able to, and developers to consume all these different services and resources independently of how many hundreds of different companies we have offering this in the market, which is what we expect to have in a few years' time. And this is just very, very quick a view of the many different companies. You will identify some very iconic Italian companies in here, like people that don't normally we associate with developing software, like Fincantieri, Telecom Italia, Tiscali, who else? Reply Engineering, across many other, among many other European companies like Amadeus or Deutsche Bahn or Mondragon Corporation. So we have this unique combination of tech providers, cloud providers, telecom companies, and end users from different industries. It's quite complex to coordinate, but we are getting there. And the main objective is this. I mean, we need some technology for everyone that needs to build their own infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, or consume from different providers to do that in a vendor-neutral way. So you don't develop vendor locking, you don't develop dependencies, especially with non-European organizations, and you can get involved in developing the technologies and control the technologies that your business depends on. And our expectations as these technologies that we are building will be applied by integrators and solution providers to different markets in the near future. I just wanted to bring you one example of, in practical terms, what this implies. So Virtual is one of the different pilots within this project. This one specifically is run by OpenNebula systems. We are building a European alternative stack for virtualization that combines all the different modules and all the different capabilities that different partners are bringing. And in the end, it's simple. I mean, managing virtual machines, Kubernetes clusters across this heterogeneous infrastructure. As you know, in practical terms, in technical terms, that's very complex, but we are trying to offer at least an alternative in Europe for those who don't want to develop these dependencies with non-EU tech vendors or hyperscalers. Apart from that, and that's also the invitation for you, after the summer will be much easier for you as developers and some of you tech providers on your own to bring your own contributions, your own technologies and expertise to this ecosystem. Even if the original group of companies is relatively small, it will be open to contributions and help, and you will be able to use this technology and apply it in your own environments and make business with these open source technologies. As you see, we're covering from the infrastructure level, mainly with the telcos and cloud providers, to this middleware or kind of abstraction layer on top of that. Then a lot of emphasis on AI, for instance, managing and deploying AI workloads across the continuum, and applying this to strategic sectors for Europe. Right now, what we've already achieved for the first time is this, and it's operative, it's this first aggregation of resources from different cloud providers where we can deploy different workloads, different applications, move them from one provider to another, in this case, Kubernetes clusters and Mini.io. We've removed these barriers between providers, because basically we aggregate the bare metal resources, and that helps to minimize friction between them. The next step, so this is working. In a few months, you will be also able to access some of this technology as what we call virtual labs. So you will have different companies in Italy, for instance, where you can approach them and use these technologies and familiarize with the APIs and the interfaces we're building for this infrastructure. And then what I wanted to mention today very briefly before I finish, because I'm probably using more time than I should, this is the next step. So in a few days' time, what we will announce is, under the IPCEI project, we will announce the first multi-provider federated AI infrastructure in Europe. So combining GPU resources from different cloud providers, plus HPC facilities for inference, but also in the near future, also fine-tuning and training of models, already with a catalog, a library of European LLMs for people to deploy this very easily on-prem or across the different locations in Europe. Okay, but this hasn't been announced yet, but it will be in a few days' time. So this is the first time the industry is collaborating in this big objective of the European Union to turn Europe into the AI continent by combining all these resources and making as easy as possible for developers and companies to make businesses and business models on top of this infrastructure, especially with AI. So that's my approach, and that's my contribution today. I'm obviously very welcome to hear what you think about this, how you feel about the concept of sovereignty, especially the problematic combination of this concept of technological sovereignty and open source, because that's always a problem to define that, and also to hear your experience and how you feel about how the market is going. Okay, so thank you.